Mrs. Nevinson was now involved. She wasn't any more on the outside looking in. Having tried to burn the manuscript, she first of all had the manuscript knocked out of her hand by some creature she could not properly describe. She also heard a sound, which was like a shriek and also like a cry of rage. Then she had a terrible dream. In the story of My Bones and My Flute. Mr. Nevinson had just described the apparition he saw when last he heard Minna Woman's flute. It became a little clearer and much more frightening. Despite her excitement over Mr. Nevinson's description of the apparition and the outburst of Jessie's, I had by no means forgotten the new development which had attracted my notice when the manifestation began. As soon as Jessie had been calmed, I tackled Mrs. Nevinson, doing my best not to sound like a police inspector, though I fear that this is exactly what I must have sounded like. "Look here, Mrs. Nevy," I said. "There's a little point we've got to get straightened out. It's about this flute playing. Are you sure you didn't hear the flute when we were hearing it a little while ago?" She shook her head with emphasis. "I never heard a single note. I purposely listened, but there was nothing at all. The only sounds I heard were the voices of the men over at the sawmill and the engines of the sawmill itself." Her husband leant forward in his chair and gave her a perplexed look. "You didn't hear it, you say, Nell? But how can that be? You handled the manuscript last night, didn't you?" "Of course I did. Don't ask me to explain it. I'm simply telling you I heard no flute playing today. Since that awful shrieking business in my ear last night, I've heard nothing. In the dream I've told you about, I did hear a flute, but I certainly haven't heard anything remotely like a flute during my waking hours today." "It's most puzzling," said Mr. Nevinson, although I could detect some relief in his manner. "At least I had assumed there would be some consistency in the trend of events." He added this with such naive dismay that I had to smile. Mrs. Nevinson gave a cackle of laughter and said, "You sound as if you want to scold Mynheer Woman, Ralph." Jessie, however, could see no humor in any of this. She said, "I know what it is. It's because Mother tried to burn the manuscript. She's hit on the right thing, and she's driven off this demon or whatever it is that's plaguing us. And yet you won't try it, Daddy. I can't understand why you should be so stubborn. Where's the harm in trying?" Her father fidgeted uncomfortably and told her, "You appear to forget the unpleasant experience your mother underwent for attempting what she did. Would you care to chance the same thing?" "And why not? It would be one nasty horror, and the whole thing would be over." Mrs. Nevinson shuddered and said, "Well, to be honest, Jessie, I don't think you'd like it, even that once. That awful, furry-looking hand." Mr. Nevinson smiled. Much of his former composure had returned, and though there were still several harrowed lines in his face, I thought I could observe the setting in of a tolerance, to employ a medical term, to the present situation. It was as though the shock of this last manifestation had produced a reaction more favorable than unfavorable, and his nervous system was attempting to adapt itself to the general strain of events. "Are you sure," he said to Jessie, "that if you tried this experiment, it would result in bringing the whole thing to an end?" "But nothing has happened to Mother today, has it?" she parried. "She says she couldn't hear the flute. Doesn't that prove that she must have succeeded in frightening off whatever it is that's troubling us, or at any rate creating some kind of protection or immunity against it?" "It proves nothing, my dear girl. We can't go jumping to conclusions in such a reckless fashion. We must wait and see. For all we know, your mother may be in as great danger as we are, due to her rash act, even greater." Mrs. Nevinson paled a trifle. "What do you mean by that, Ralph?" she asked. According to what you've told us, that dream of yours last night was pretty vivid, wasn't it? And it wasn't a very pleasant thing that happened to you.
But it was only a nightmare.
I know it was only a nightmare, Nell. But you yourself had to admit that it was different. You said you could have sworn that the events in your dream had actually happened to you. How do we know that what you dreamt may not carry some sinister significance? This, of course, started us off on a new phase of speculation. For my part, I was inclined to treat it lightly. Dreams, I argued, were just dreams. It was true that Freud attached a great deal of importance to them, but Freud only explained them as being symbolic of the functionings of the subconscious mind. He never tried to suggest that a dream might be connected with a supernatural event. Mr. Nevinson, however, pointed out that what was happening to us could not be explained scientifically. Hence, why should we not be justified in entertaining the belief that this dream of his wife's might be connected in some way with the events of actuality? Especially, too, he went on, as the dream in question seemed to resemble so closely in general characteristics the incidents with which we were so familiar. She had heard a flute in her dream, and it had seemed to compel her to follow it. And there was this glimpse of something greyish and furry scurrying past her. It all seemed to fit together perfectly, didn't it? But, as might have been expected, this discussion soon fizzled out and left us where we were at the beginning. It was futile continuing it, we all agreed, for we could prove nothing. We could state nothing with certainty. There was no precedent that we could use as a basis for our deductions. That very night, though, an incident occurred that made us wonder. At about 11:30, Mrs. Nevinson awoke with a scream, and when her husband and I rushed in to see what was the matter, she told us that the identical dream of the night before had recurred. The room was in darkness when Mr. Nevinson and I went in, and it was I who switched on the light, using the electric torch I had brought to find the switch, which was near the dressing table. As the 60-watt bulb flared alive, I assured myself that it must have been my imagination, but I could have sworn that just at the instant the light flooded the room, I had a glimpse of some shapeless mass vanishing over the window-sill. Automatically I ran to the window and flashed the beam of the torch on the veranda, but there was nothing to be seen. So I had to conclude that it must have been some optical illusion induced by the abrupt change from darkness to brilliant light. In the meantime, Jessie was sitting up in bed, blinking around with alarmed, sleepy eyes and asking what was wrong, while her mother, on the other bed close alongside of hers, lay flat on her stomach, her face buried in her pillow like a frightened child. Neither of them used mosquito nets, spiders holding no dread for them, and there are no mosquitoes at the season. When eventually we succeeded in making Mrs. Nevinson realize there was nothing to fear, she sat up and told us about the dream. She was perspiring, and her face looked pale. She breathed in a slightly labored manner, as though from recent exertions, and her hair had a straggly, untidy appearance. She said, "It was exactly like last night, except that I seemed to advance a little further along that jungle track. It was really peculiar. I felt far more frightened than last night. I felt as if I got nearer to some horrible place. And then, just suddenly, that bony hand clutched my arm and something whispered in my ear. It said, 'No farther today.' And then I woke up." Her husband listened with a grave face, so grave a face that Jessie, who was very sensitive to his moods, kept watching him with anxiety as though impatient to hear what his verdict would be. After a silence, Mr. Nevinson said, "There was one new feature in tonight's dream, it would appear. The fact that you progressed farther along the track." He glanced at me. "Milton, what do you think?" I shook my head. Jessie exclaimed,
"I believe it's a kind of warning."
"A warning?" Her father gave her a frown.
"That's what I think it is," Jessie said. "Mother is going to be led to some horrible place. And then anything might happen.
Anything like what? I asked.
She might be killed.
Killed in her dream?
How can we be sure she can't be killed in a dream? Perhaps she might just not wake up or something like that. I think it's that manuscript. It's because she tried to burn it. She's roused up some terrible evil against her.
Jessie, in her fright, might have spoken rashly that night when her mother had the second nightmare, but her words turned out to be only too prophetic. That dream recurred without fail, and Mrs. Nevinson's terror increased from night to night. With every dream, she said, she advanced a little farther along the jungle track, and with every dream the sound of the flute became louder, and the horror that was waiting for her grew nearer. And every night the thing that clutched her arm just before she woke up whispered its warning into her ear, "No further today." She was quite sure about it now. It was the manuscript. By trying to burn it, she had attracted some terribly evil presence to herself. And she was doomed. At least it looked so, didn't it? She was being taken farther and farther along that track. Eventually, she would reach the end of it and be confronted with some unspeakable horror, and that would spell the end of her. She tried to say all this in a quiet voice, but could not keep out the hysteria that lurked behind her calm. With the approach of darkness, she grew restless and nervous and kept glancing about her, and it was always with reluctance that she went to bed. She began to cultivate the habit of reading in bed until a late hour. "A thing I've never done in my life before," she said. Meanwhile, the situation for Mr. Nevinson and Jessie continued to grow more acute in the story of My Bones and My Flute.